Thank you for joining me for another episode of Build Your Poetry Manuscript with KMA. I am KMA Sullivan, founder and publisher of Yes Yes Books. Today, in episode 11, we're going to take a look at revising across the manuscript. Perhaps something I should say at the beginning of this conversation is that it is 100% okay to revise a poem that has already been published. That's no problem at all. Revise the poem in all kinds of ways is totally acceptable. In terms of title, you can change the title. You can change the form. All kinds of changes can occur to your poems even after they've been published, in order for them to live in a manuscript with other poems. So now you're ready to think about how these poems are talking to one another, how they are chatting with one another. And that is something that distinguishes what a poem is doing by itself versus what a poem is doing when it's in a collection, because the poems are chatting with one another. If the word pineapple shows up in a poem in the first part of your collection, and then it shows up again 20 pages later, I guarantee you those two poems are talking with each other, and the reader is going to hear it. And if it's intentional, fantastic, for whatever purposes you have. But if it's not intentional, then you need to think about changing one of those fruits, because the reader is going to hear the connection and is going to feel that things that they understood from the earlier poem are supposed to inform their understanding of the later poem. Now, not all words work that way, of course. You can have the word the and then and moon in your book as often as you want to. But just know that some words push out. So a word like pineapple, that's not a word we say every day, or elevator. They push out, they make a little more noise. Colors make a fair amount of noise. And that partly has to do with how many emotional associations we have with colors. So we tend to pay attention when a color shows up. The red scarf, and then there's a red dress, and then there's a red curtain. Now, maybe you are setting that up intentionally. Fantastic. And that's going to be a very interesting conversation. The reader's going to pull those pieces together and have them inform one another in terms of the reader's understanding. And that's going to get them to a richer, more interesting place. But if you're not actually after that conversation, that in the moment you're simply trying to give some detailed visual context, you got to go in and change some of those colors. Maybe the dress is green and the scarf is still red, but the curtains are yellow. And so that way, they're not going to be chatting with one another. One way that poets check their word usage is by putting the poem through word cloud. That is not going to show you if you've got a word like pineapple that's repeated only once, but it is going to show you if the word tree is one of the top 4 used words in a collection, by example. And so you have to ask yourself, as usual, do I mean to do this? Is this what I want to happen? The words that show up the largest in the word cloud need to be part of the center of the manuscript, need to be closely related to the heart of the manuscript, because they're driving the manuscript as a whole. So that's one of the reasons you want to make sure you know which are the words that show up the most. And if the word like shows up a lot, oh man, I'm going to dive back in there and get rid of that word. As often as you can, just clean it right out. Every now and then, there's a great moment for that word. In general, no. Now look at the voicing. You've got some poems that have vernacular in them. You've got some poems that have formal language structure. Again, you can have that mix in a single manuscript, but the mix needs to be done in a way that makes sense, that the reader can see at least some of what you're doing. The reader doesn't have to understand everything all the time, not at all. That's actually one of the reasons why it's so important to take out the little stuff that doesn't even matter to you, that unsettles the reader. So the comma usage that's not consistent, some vocabulary that in the voice that's not consistent with the voice that you're presenting. Pull out the stuff that makes it harder for the reader to relax into your work. And then you can take them places where they don't necessarily understand what's going on. That's, of course, going to happen in work that is complex, multifaceted. And also when you've got a reader who isn't necessarily your easiest audience, your more automatic audience. You're going to be showing them things that maybe they've never heard of before. So it is perfectly okay. I am absolutely not saying that the reader needs to understand where they are at every moment. But in order for that to work still as a journey for them, they need to understand enough so that they can relax into the adventure. Another thing to look at is punctuation. In general, you're going to have a dominant style of punctuation in a manuscript. More or less formal, more or less experimental. So to say that you need to check your punctuation is not to say that it has to be identical in every poem. Not at all. But the exceptions are going to be noticed. And there are some things that do need to be identical. So, for example, how are you formatting an M dash? It's got to be the same throughout the collection. So I would recommend starting with the no space before, no space after. That's kind of the most traditional way, if we can say anything's traditional about M dashes. And I love M dashes. They do a whole lot of wonderful work. They need to look the same because you don't want the reader to, again, stop their journey and ask themselves, oh wait, why is that different? Why is there a space before right now? And there hasn't been until now. So M dashes are an example where, in my opinion, as always, toss it, where, in my opinion, the formatting of around M dashes needs to be the same throughout the manuscript. But then let's look at, perhaps you've got some poems where you have removed all of the periods. Great. You might want the entire manuscript to be formatted in that way. And because of word choice, you have done other things to help the reader figure out how to grok what you're saying. And they don't necessarily need the periods. But also you might have a couple different types of poems, and one where all of the punctuation is stripped out, and then a set of poems where you've got more formal punctuation. Again, fine. But take a look at the poems that have the more formal punctuation and make sure that makes sense for the collection. Take a look at the poems that in general have no periods, no commas, and catch when you've got a comma that slipped in, a period that slipped in, and get it out of there. You've got to be managing your choice, whatever choice you made for that poem, for that set of poems, for the manuscript, but pull out the irregularities that are not necessary, that may be a distraction to the project you're really trying to present. Look for precision in chronology, in relationships, when referring to science, to nature, to certain bodies of knowledge. Make sure that what you have in the work is factually accurate. Here's an example. A poem is describing the passage of time by bringing up flowers, a movement through the spring. It's not daffodils and then crocuses and then tulips. That's not the order. Flowers have a natural order, and in terms of bloom, you got to get it right. Same thing with birds. You got birds going on. Some birds nest in bushes. Some birds nest in trees. Some birds sit on wires. Some birds just walk around on the ground. If you've got a bird in there for reasons, and you mention something like a song, like a position, it's got to be factually accurate. So you got to look up that stuff. As with ordering, give yourself time if you're revising across the manuscript. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do some. You can work on the colors and then put the manuscript away. You can work on the tenses or the capitalization rules and then put the manuscript away so that you have some rest. This is a hard job. It's a tedious job. But here's the thing that's kind of beautiful about it. It's important and detail-oriented because of how powerful what you're doing is. Every single thing matters. And your work is worth that attention. Our last episode is next week. Thank you for joining me again today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.